What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG down there. We like it at Magic, and it's the first deck tech, of course, that 2021 season. And what did the patrons want to see? They wanted to see the biggest of boys. So today, Sultai, Ugin, strap in. We're doing it. We're doing it. First deck tech of the season. We're doing it.
Yo, I'm sorting through some heinous haters like a pooper scooper. I'm just trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm double Mario, that mean I'm super. And I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre. Got them all day like a Kanye, but I'm way better getting cheddar in Monterey. But Jack, you don't know, man. You got the show, man. You want roast beef? Well, I'm Arby's.
And we're back. Yeah, sorry I didn't put dogs on the poll, everybody. It'll be on the next one. But for now, we're going to talk about Ugin the Spirit Boy, because that's pretty much all anyone can talk about. In the early days of this standard, it seems to be all about who can come up with the best Ugin deck the fastest. It's a real RuPaul's Spirit Dragon race. That's a terrible joke. But anyway, it's easy to see why everyone's so hype about this card, because once it's on the table, it's probably the most powerful card in Standard, period. Usually, when Oogie Boogie comes down, he's just going to immediately reset the board and effectively restart the game for you, except now you have a Planeswalker that just casts Lightning Bolt for free every turn, which is pretty good. And if you ever actually do hit to the ultimate, that probably wins the game. I can't tell you. Haven't done it in this standard yet. Full disclosure, I've been building this deck for about a week now and testing it in paper the old-fashioned way with Sharpies and basic lands and stuff. But before I came on camera today, I went and played this deck for 4 hours in Arena. And in that time frame, I won more games by just resolving Ugin than anything else. You resolve an Ugin, your opponent scoops, and you move on to the next game is how it usually works out. But I imagine if you do have to bolt until you hit the ultimate, that also could work, but usually you don't have to think that far ahead. A lot of opponents just scoop to Ugin being on the table. The only problem is, and you may have noticed this, we actually have to get to it in the first place because it costs 8 mana. It's so much mana is 8. So most of our plan here is dedicated to just ramping to make sure that we can hit Ugin as quickly as possible. Now, to that effect, we got a couple of familiar faces. Let me reintroduce you to Growth Spiral and Euro, in case you somehow forgot about these cards. Any blue-green base ramp deck is going to play all 4 copies of both of these cards. I think that's correct. In this day and age, you absolutely have to have all 4 copies of Growth Spiral because you really don't have access to too many good 2-drops in this kind of deck. You could play a 2-drop Mana Dork or something, but I want to play as few things as possible that leave the table when we actually play Ugin. Right, so with that in mind, I wanted to play as few actual permanents in this deck because I don't want to lose too much when we play Ugin and blow the entire table up. So that's where Growth Spiral comes in. This is an instant that just throws a land on the table and also draws us a card. That makes it to where we can get to our Ugin a lot faster and actually draw our Ugin more consistently too. Same thing's true of Euro. This is just a Growth Spiral on steroids. We get part of the Growth Spiral plus an extra 3 life on top of the drawn card and land we get to put on the table. And eventually, it can just be a threat that ends the game if we either never get to our Ugin or if our Ugin's not enough to win the game. But of course, that's not all the ramp. We're also playing a 3 of Arboreal Grazer, 2 copies of Cultivate, and we're on a 3 of Migration Path as well. Now, I really wanted to play more copies of Cultivate in this deck. I was very excited about getting to play this card in Standard again, but I've come to realize it's definitely not a 4 of in this deck, and in fact, 0 copies might be correct, but I just couldn't resist playing Cultivate. We want another 3-drop in the deck, and we want it to be functionally similar to Euro as well. And there's a few cards that fit the bill. We could play Beanstalk Giant, but Beans doesn't get you 2 lands, whereas Cultivate does. Plus, we're in the kind of deck that plays Arboreal Grazer, Euro, Growth Spiral, so it shouldn't be too hard to get the second land that we get off of Cultivate into play. So, again, end of the day, I didn't play too many copies of Cultivate, but I still ended up on a 2 of. Migration Path is another card I quickly realized we didn't really want 4 copies of in the deck. You can filter extra copies for just a couple of mana, and sometimes being able to draw extra cards can come in handy, but for the most part, once you've cast your 1 copy of Migration Path in a game, you're more or less done casting copies of Migration Path. You don't want to see too many more of them, so I ended up on just 3 copies here. Same thing with Arboreal Grazer. This is a card that I want to see early, but I don't necessarily want to see often, so 3 copies sounds correct. But it turns out we've learned this lesson forever ago. If you want to play really expensive cards in Standard, just play Nissa in your deck. We're going to play all 4 copies of this, because I do want to see this as often as possible. Your opponent is trying to answer it the moment it comes down, and very often they will answer it, so it's nice to have backup copies of it. I really don't think you should play any fewer than 4, and if you can slip a 5th one in there, go ahead. Don't do that. Don't do that. But you get the point I'm trying to make. Nissa is extremely important to our plan, because if we can get a Nissa down, protect her for a turn, which is fairly easy, because she makes a creature to block for, then the next turn we can easily drop an Ugin. In the meantime, this also lets us cast all the other expensive garbage in the deck that we're trying to cast, and it's a creature factory that makes creatures that Ugin doesn't blow up because they're colorless. There's a lot of cool things about Nissa in this deck, and even if our own Ugin blows up our own Nissa, Nissa will still leave behind value and help us get to that Ugin a little bit faster. Trust me, you want a play set of Nissa. This may be the most important card in the deck. But our last ramp card isn't really a ramp card, but it kind of counts as a ramp card, so we're going to talk about Ugin the Ineffable here. I was playing 3 copies of this card when I first started building this deck, but it turns out that just because we have Ugin the Spirit Dragon, that doesn't suddenly make Ugin the Ineffable super playable. You'd think that it would, because this gives you a discount on Ugin the Spirit Dragon, so you can play Big Brother Ugin. Like, if you have this card out and you paid 6 mana for it, you ought to be able to untap on the next turn and play Big Boy Ugin. That doesn't happen as often as you'd think it should. Very often when you play 6 mana Ugin, you are in many cases forced to immediately put him down to 1 loyalty by getting rid of something on the other side of the table. Your opponent attacks into him and suddenly you're back to square one, so you probably should have just played a better removal spell than a 6 mana removal spell that only takes out 1 thing and has restrictions. So, sometimes Ugin can work out. You'll untap with it on the battlefield, immediately cast your big Ugin, and then suddenly you got a big wall of planeswalkers it's impossible to get past. That does happen on occasion, but again, just because big Ugin's in the format doesn't immediately make this a million times more playable than it already was, and it really wasn't seeing any play to begin with, and there was a reason for that. All that said, I am going to work in 1 copy here because it's nice to have an extra creature factory that can blow stuff up, and yes, it also does decrease the cost of Ugin. But we need another big old threat to finish the game off, because sometimes a bolt to turn just doesn't do it quickly enough, so to close games out fast, we're going to play 3 copies of Hydroid Krasis here, because we're playing Nissa. Just like the rule is if you want to ramp the big stuff, play Nissa. The rule is also, if you're playing Nissa in your deck, you should play some Hydroid Krasis. 9 times out of 10. And that definitely works out here, because in the late game, they just make like an 8-8 or a 10-10 Krasis and close the game out right after you drop that Ugin. It is really nice to go Ugin, blow everything up, next turn, Hydroid Krasis for a bunch, because again, that closes most games out if your opponent didn't already scoop to your Ugin. But we got a couple of pieces of removal to get through before we get to the lands here, starting with a couple of copies of Casualties of War. Now, I want to play 3 copies of Casualties, but I've got that 6 mana Ugin in here, and I don't want to play like 4 6-drops. I don't personally want to do it, so I'm splitting it with 2 Casualties of War, 1 6 mana Ugin. But Casualties is still just an amazing card. There's a lot of ramp in this deck, so it's not uncommon to get to Casualties on turn 4, and that's a great way to bridge the gap. Buy yourself some time, some breathing room, so you can actually get to that 8 mana Ugin. And there are a wide spread of targets for this thing to hit right now. Against a lot of decks, you'll hit a Planeswalker and an enchantment and a creature some of the time. And a land, for that matter. But even if you only hit a creature in the land, you'll be happy as long as this card keeps you alive so that you can actually get to the point in the game where you can cast your big haymakers and stuff. It's crazy that a 6 mana card can bridge the gap for you, but again, with so much ramp in the deck, it's pretty easy to cast this relatively early to buy yourself that time. But to finish off the main deck here, we're playing 2 copies of Eliminate. Now, originally this was Wolfwillow Haven, and then it was Paradise Druid, but at the end of the day, I just didn't want yet another ramp piece, because we already have so much ramp in the deck. We kept getting ran over by aggro, like every time we played against aggro. We're always 1 turn from getting to that Ugin, so Eliminate came in, and it's really helped change the complexion of the deck. A lot of these Sultai ramp decks would play 2 copies of Tyrant Scorn in the main deck. But honestly, I think that this is just a much better card than Tyrant Scorn, because we don't have any creatures that we're trying to protect, right? So this just does everything Tyrant Scorn does and more by taking out Teferis and Narsets are especially a massive hindrance to our plan, because a lot of our stuff draws cards, so this has been really important against Narset in a couple of games already. But Eliminate is just a really nice, versatile, diverse piece of removal that takes out a whole bunch of stuff, and even though we're only playing a couple of copies in the main deck, when you do run up against aggro and mid-range strategies, you'll be really happy to have this in the early turns. Now here's the mana base, and take a deep breath, because we're playing 29 lands in this deck. Now honestly, that's not uncharted territory, and it's not entirely uncommon in this format to play 29 lands. Even the non-Yorion Fires of Invention decks before Fires got banned played 29 lands, and right now the Team of Reclamation decks will often play 29 lands. So again, it's not entirely rare for a deck to play 29, especially a deck that has Arboreal Grazer and Growth Spiral and Euro and lots of ways to drop extra lands on their their turn, so you need every land that you can get to maximize the ramp from those cards. So again, 29 might seem like a lot, but I promise you, it's the correct number. We've got the full complement of shock lands in here, but we don't have 4 of each of them. We are playing 4 copies of Overgrown Tomb and Breeding Pool. The lands that can make green, we want 4 copies of to get those Arboreal Grazers as quickly as possible. But we're only playing 2 Watery Graves in the deck. That's because blue and black are just not as important to this deck as green, but you do want enough blue sources. That's why we're also playing 2 copies of Temple of Mystery in the deck. Now, this is kind of a utility land that we can't play too many copies of, but it is nice to drop off of a Spiral or a Euro and then Scry. That can often be really nice. We're also playing 2 copies of Zagoth Triumph on the deck to make all the colors that we need. 4 copies of Fabled Passage because it fixes our mana well and goes really well with Euro. But aside from that, there's also a copy of Castle Vantris to help scry and make sure that we get our land, or just our drops, just whatever cards we might need at the time. Castle Vantris can be very important in the late game. And then we've got 5 forests, 2 swamps, and 3 islands to round things out. We want a fair amount of basic lands in the deck because we've got Fabled Passage, and we've got Cultivate, and we've got Migration Path. Just lots and lots of ways to go and get basic lands. So we need a fair amount of basic lands so that those cards never run dry. But let's take a look at the sideboard real quick, and a lot of work has been done on this sideboard, but I'm still not sure it's in the shape I want it to be because I don't know that Agonizing Remorse has to be in this deck. It is very, very good in slower matchups, can sometimes get important cards out of Bant's hand or Temur Reclamation's hand, and that can be great, but I think most of this sideboard really needs to be geared more towards beating the aggro matchup. And to that end, I am playing 2 copies of Cry of the Carnarium and 2 Ritual of Soot. You want to make sure you have these sweepers in there in games 2 and 3 against the aggro decks because otherwise we don't have much of a chance against them. In terms of black cards, I'm also playing 2 copies of Noxious Grasp. Note that most of the black cards in the deck are in the sideboard. We do have Casualties and Eliminate in the main deck, but once we get to the board, that's where a lot of our good black cards come in. And Noxious Grasp is a good example of that. We do have Eliminate in the main to take out Teferis and whatnot, but this will also help us take out Teferis as well as Nissas and other Planeswalkers. So I do like Noxious Grasp a good bit, and every now and again it'll hit an important creature. 3 copies of Negate. This is one of the most important cards on the board. This can be very good against, say, Zenith Flares in the Cycling deck. It can be amazing against Expansion Explosion in the Temur Reclamation matchup, and it can just counter important Planeswalkers. It can counter stuff that they want to use against our Ugin, like Elspeth Conquers Death. There's just no, end to the things a good Negate can do. So a well-timed Negate will often effectively win the game for you. We're going to bring some of those in a lot of game 2 and 3s. There's also Wilt, just a couple of copies of this. Wilt can take out Wilderness Reclamation, but there's plenty of other things that Wilt can deal with. So I wanted a couple of copies of that, but there's also a Tamiyo to finish off the board. This can get back a copy of Negate, which is often really important, but it can also get back a Sweeper or a Ugin or a Nissa or Casualties of War. There's just Tamiyo in a very long game can be one of the best cards in your deck, and it can even find an Ugin or a Krasis off the top some of the time if that's what you need it for. But here are your power rankings. A final score of 65. Not a low score, but not as high a score as you might have expected. To be honest, I think the Sultai shell might be one of the best shells, especially if you're playing in best of 3. But there's some argument to be made that the Bant shell might be a little bit better because that deck gets to play Teferi and not get so completely creamed by aggro decks, right? So I'm not quite sure what the best actual build for Ugin is right now, but I did like the Sultai build for the main deck, Casualties of War. I like the idea of playing Eliminate, but at the end of the day, I'm not 100% sure this is going to be the best shell for Ugin when it's all said and done. But that said, this has won me a bunch of games in testing so far. I've played a battery of testing in my proxy testing against decks like Temur Reclamation and Cycling and Mono Red Aggro, as well as Bant Yorion. So that's kind of been my battery during preseason so far. And the deck does have problems against a lot of the better decks in the format. We get completely bowled over by Mono Red Aggro, and our entire game rests in the games 2 and 3 after we have access to our sideboard. It is very rare that we win game 1 against Mono Red. Against decks playing counterspells like Temur Reclamation right now, we also have kind of a bad time, but we have to play very carefully. If we play carefully, we can win some of those games, but there are some times where Team of Reclamation does not feel winnable if we just can't draw the right things, right? Or the correct density of threats. Because very often, one Ugin ain't gonna seal the deal, son. I don't necessarily think that Ugin the Spirit Dragon is the most powerful card in Standard. It might be once you actually resolve it and get it onto the table, but actually getting there is a little bit tough in the current environment. Now, I say the deck is fair, but I will say that its nut draws are unbelievable. If you're able to go first, you get the right amount of ramp, you go turn 3 Nissa into turn 4 Ugin, it does feel like you're cheating in those situations, but those are few and far between compared to what you might be picturing when you pick this deck up. So, full disclosure, I've given you fair warning here, the deck is not an amazing, world-ending deck. It's a great best-of-3 deck, and it might even be one of the best decks in the format, but there are plenty of foils against it at the moment. But that's all I've got for now. Make sure you let me know how you feel about it down there in the comments section, what we could have done differently, how you'd build the deck for best-of-1, because again, this deck is a best-of-3 deck. In best-of-1, you're going to get completely run over by aggro decks 90% of the time. So just fair warning, keep that in mind. But if you were going to build it for best-of-1, let me know how you do that. How do you work sweepers in and all that stuff. So there's a lot of conversation to be had, and I've tried to elucidate my thoughts on Ugin as succinctly as I could in this video while I had the platform to do so. Again, I think there's other shells for this deck, but the Sultai one has really been good for me. It's given me a chance to play cards like Eliminate, which is overperformed in testing, and Casualties of War is always a good card, so I really like the Sultai version. Just let me know how you'd build it differently down there, and of course, I'll let you see the deck in action really soon. In just a couple of days, I'll have gameplay of this deck on the channel, so just come back, check us out, and look for that. Or you could subscribe, and then your email will tell you when I put that video out, so long as you also hit the bell for the notifications. I'm also going to have a Patreon poll out again tonight, the same night I upload this video. So if you haven't gone over there yet, pledge your $1 a month, and that'll let you vote on what decks we do around here. Aside from that, like the video, and if you want to pick this deck up, do so through the link in the description. That'll take you over to my dudes at TCG Player. If you pick the deck up through them at super low prices, then some of that'll come back to you, dude, and I can eat and feed the cats for a month. So that's help me out by doing that. If you'd like to order this deck, do it through that link. But aside from that, I guess I'm done. Again, I'm all ears now. I have been all in on the Ugin deck for like the last week, trying to make the best Ugin deck I could. But, there's probably some stuff I hadn't thought about. So let me know down there in the comments section how we could do this differently. It's a very important time to talk Ugin. So I guess I'm done, though. I want to talk about this deck for another half hour, but I guess I'll get the chance to do that soon enough when I play the deck. So again, be here for that. But I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.